Welcome to this Cambridge Marketing College webinar. We're talking here today about personalization at scale using AI. This is a big new opportunity that I think all marketers and content creators, and to be fair, most business professionals should be taking very, very seriously. So we're going to talk today about how to use AI to tailor experiences right across the customer journey, across channels that you are currently using, or maybe ones that you're looking to use, while staying at the same time ethical, transparent, and of course, commercially effective. So this is doing the right kind of business at scale using AI. So we're going to explore how you can use AI to support personalization in a way that improves and enhances the ways or things that your customers perceive as being relevant, how to support your customer lifetime value. So this isn't just for quick fixes. This is right the way through the entire customer journey on the longer term rather than just immediately. We're going to respect privacy, consent, and trust. So we're going to do things properly and responsibly. And we're going to ensure that we combine some of the emerging academic theory with some practical marketing applications. So why does this matter right here, right now? Well, it really does. I mean, AI, as I'm sure you're very aware right now, is possible to tailor experiences, recommendations, timing, scheduling, and delivery of content and information and messages across far more touch points than anything we've ever been able to do before. And certainly far, far more effectively than doing things manually. So, research is now showing that AI personalization is very much a driver of growth, and particularly in organizations and in sectors where things have been a little bit stalling because everything is kind of felt as being a little bit commoditized. So, everything is quite vanilla, generic, and I can get from one company pretty much the same offer in that same sector or category from another as well. So, what we're looking to do here is use AI personalization to drive growth, to improve efficiencies, to help with customer retention, to make the brand more relevant, I guess, to the customers that it serves. And if we can embed this across workflows, in other words, actually understand all the processes where personalization at scale can be achieved, then rather than doing it in little isolated pilot studies, we can roll this out big time. Now, I'm not saying we've got to jump into the big time straight away. Obviously, pilot studies and testing is important, but having this longer term, wider ambition is, I think, probably quite a sensible way of kind of starting to kind of position personalization at scale within your planning and within your strategies. So, a reflective question right now is where would better personalization currently make the biggest difference in your customer journey? Are there any gaps or something that you think, if we were to personalize there, that could be a game changer because it's a bottleneck or it's an area in the customer journey where we kind of fall a little bit flat or we're very same as the competition? If there's anything that's jumping out at you right now when I ask you that question, that could be a good starting point. So, what does this kind of phrase personalization at scale actually mean? Well, in many ways, it's the ability to tailor and personalize content, offers, the journey itself, and all service interactions, including sales interactions, across larger than you could manually audiences using a combination of data, automation, and AI. So McKinsey describes this as the next best practice and focuses on what a customer most needs in a given moment rather than just sending the same message to everyone. And this is really at the heart of good, effective personalization. It very much thinks and puts customer first, not just generically, but where they actually are in their journey of experience with you. That's the key question here. At what points do you feel that personalization could make the biggest, most fundamental difference? And there will be certain levels and layers of particular touch points in the customer journey where this applies more than in others. And again, that's something we are going to explore in this talk. So, a first theory to anchor this is about relationship marketing. So, where can we see this personalization starting to take effect? Well, in relationship marketing, it treats the customer as a long-term relationship, and that long-term relationship is a core source of value. So, we're not just looking at sales, we're not looking at lead generation, we're looking at the longer-term customer relationship as a core source of value in both directions for the customer and for the business. So, academic work on customer management and CLV, customer lifetime value, shows that selective retention and stronger relationships improve long term marketing performance. And this is why I'm saying that personalization is a long term commitment. It isn't just only the short term clicks or quick little engagement or an initial sale, it's about the length of the journey. This is about building strong relationships and it's about balancing the short term with this long term value. And ideally, what you're looking for is both. Yes, you want to appeal to more people quickly, effectively, get those sales in the door, but it's then how you build the relationship after those sales that AI can very much help to facilitate. Second theory to anchor this really importantly in your thinking is a concept called service dominant logic. And this argues that values created in use and in experience, not simply in the product itself. So basically, what that means is that personalization should improve the customer's actual experience across the piece. So, of finding, of choosing, of using, and staying with the offer that has been presented to it. So again, this is something to really think about, which, if I was to ask you which part of the customer experience would feel most valuable if it was being tailored to a customer right now, think of your customer experience. Which one, if it was tailored, if it was personalized, would feel most valuable? That's probably the one to go after first. That's where you're going to get most value in the short term. The third theory to anchor this concept is privacy calculus. Now, this is a concept that explains why people weigh perceived benefits against privacy costs when deciding what data to share. Now, this is important because you can't do personalization unless you understand the customer. And to understand the customer, you have to be collecting information and data. So this privacy calculus explains that people weigh perceived benefits, in other words, what am I going to get back against the cost of giving you that information? So there is a paradox here that shows clearly a tension. Customers often appreciate relevance, yet they feel uncomfortable when personalization becomes opaque, invasive, or even if they perceive it to be manipulative. So there is a cost benefit trade off here. So think about, am I collecting more than I need to? Am I actually personalizing to a greater extent than is actually necessary? And how is my customer going to perceive that? You can work with your AI to figure out the most effective balance. And that really is our theory three here. So if you bring those three elements together, you can begin to think about a simple strategic test before you start to kind of roll out AI-enabled personalization. So before building any AI personalization, kind of ask some questions. Does this help the customer achieve something faster, more clearly, or with less effort? Am I going to reduce the friction of this decision making in the customer's mind? If you are, then it's ready to personalize. Does it support a meaningful marketing objective, such as customer retention, maybe improving conversion quality, or enhancing the lifetime value? If it does one or a number of those things, it's time to roll it out. Can we explain it clearly and govern responsibly? Is another question that you need to ask. Because again, if you haven't process mapped out this stuff, if you haven't stepped into your customer's shoes, if you haven't viewed it from their perspective, then you don't want to be trying to personalize something that you haven't experienced yourself, because you're very likely to take some wrong directions if you do that. And so, what we're looking to do here is we're looking to emphasize value, we're looking to emphasize purpose, and we're going to be taking accountability here. And if you can't answer those three questions really effectively, or you can't sort of get a grasp on that, then probably plotting customer journey, understanding and asking your customers what the level or the benchmark is right now before you start to take things forward is going to be critical. A lot of the time we make assumptions, and this is about no assumptions. This is about properly, actively listening and then building on the good stuff, maybe improving the stuff where there's improvements to be made. So it's not necessarily a jump straight in and solve everything. This is part of an ongoing broader process that's important. And it is important because customer expectation is in constant increase. It really is. I mean, they're expecting a tailored and personalized experience, yet also want stronger trust, data protection, and transparency around how AI, if it's being overtly used, is shaping the interactions. In other words, they don't want you to just think, oh, AI can just make things super quick and super efficient, but actually I'm losing the human touch. That might not be a positive in your customers, particularly your customers' eyes. They might view that as a negative. So even though you're going down this personalization at scale using AI, it becomes a bit too automated, a little bit too robotic from the customer's perspective, and so therefore it will not work. Now, for some customer groupings and some segments and some individuals, it's totally fine. If they get what they expect and what they want and what they desire and they perceive it's valuable, then it is. This is about probably really putting customer first. It can be a very different experience for a lot of organizations who say that's what they do, but actually find it really hard to evidence. And what we're doing here is we're kind of creating some real strong data foundations, and these need to come before the AI. If you are just thinking that AI is going to solve everything, and actually what you're doing is you're basing it on weak data, i.e., weak foundations, then this is not going to work well. It's not going to end in a good place. So it means that for marketers, personalization should start with a usable data architecture, clear IDs, governed data workflows, and agreed data definitions. In other words, making sure that you're collecting the right information, you're storing it appropriately, you're going to then integrate, use it, and analyze it appropriately for the right reasons. And so this data governance becomes really, really key. If you put poor data in, to even the best possible framework, you're going to get poor stuff out the other end. There's a lot of analogies and a lot of examples of this over the decades, not just with AI systems, but with everything we've ever done in marketing. Bad stuff in equals bad stuff out. So what you want to be doing is feeding the right stuff, the good stuff, into this AI funded plan. And knowing your data types is also really, really important. There's been a real shift over recent years to what we call first party data. In other words, that's data that you hold from the interactions that you have, not third party, not second party, not stuff that exists necessarily in social media interactions, which are never owned by you. They're owned by, if you check the small print, the data platforms or the social platforms that those interactions happen on. We're talking here predominantly about first party data from direct interactions that you have with your customers, and you hold that data. It's yours, well, in association with your customer. And also zero party data that customers provide intentionally, such as preferences and profile choices and decisions that they make. And there's also behavioral data that you can find from their browsing, their purchase, their usage, and their service interactions. So there's a lot of ways that we can bring this together. And the ICO's AI guidance says that if you're going to use AI to model this data or work with this data, make clear that purpose, adequacy, and fairness is being used to shape what data you're collecting and using. In other words, you have to have some guidelines for your staff and your teams and the people who work with you, as well as for yourself to refer to. And you have to have policies that are going to be shared with your customer. It's the small print that needs to be relatively big print, or at least bigger print than most organizations would like, because it's this kind of approach that enables you to build the trust that we were talking about before. And in many ways, data minimization still applies. AI systems often want lots and lots of data to learn from, to enable them to make decisions and recommendations to you. And yet, organizations still need to legally only collect the data they actually need and no more. So there's again a balance that you need to strike. And this is especially important in marketing personalization. Teams can be tempted to capture excessive detail, either just in case or because we might want to do this with it, or because the AI has asked us for it. So you have to stop collecting data without reducing value. You have to stop collecting data that is not going to be used or that you have no plan to use just because you can. There's a real kind of responsibility that as marketing we have here to ensure that we are doing just enough to be able to deliver just enough level of this personalization that gives just enough of the value that we're after to get just enough customer lifetime value so that everybody wins. It is a juggling act, it's a balancing act, and a lot of thought needs to go into what do we really need? What would serve us and the customer best? So again, there's a little bit of art and a little bit of science going into this. And governance is part of our job in marketing. Personalization, and particularly AI personalization, sits inside data protection law, not outside of it. We have to do this. Proper AI data governance exists right here, right now. And you need to know who is in charge of that, who's accountable for that in your organization. And it might be you. Larger organizations often have governance teams or parts of the organization who will administer and police this stuff. But if you're in an organization that doesn't have that resource, it could be you. And you need to then be able to evidence that you're doing things diligently, you're doing things with the right intention. And as long as you can evidence that that is your intention to be providing this ongoing value as you begin to personalize the experience, and that you're juggling this fine balance between never too much, never too little, never too high, never too low, then you're able to do this in a really conscious way that adheres to the guidelines. And then what we'll be doing once we've collected or we're working with that kind of data holding, we're going to be able to then do some profiling and some, hopefully, if we're using AI effectively, automated decision making. Now, personalization often involves profiling, and there is guidance here that treats this as a regulated activity. So you need to be looking at GDPR and EU guidance. And the ICO and the EDPP both stress that profiling and automated decision making does require some very clear, responsible guidelines. Transparency, fairness, clear lawful basis in terms of the way you structure this and the systems that you produce, and especially where decisions significantly can affect people and the experience you give to them through your products and services. So you need to be clear about building this strategically as well as doing it tactically. So where are we going to start to see this kind of sort of playing out? Because it sounds like, okay, there's a bit of work to do up front and we've got to make sure our data holding is robust and sound and compliant. Yeah. Okay. So now once we've done that, where do we then take it? Well, we can take it in a whole variety of different levels in the customer journey. And one of them, which is often used and often quoted, is in acquisition. I mean, this is going to help us to improve our acquisition by helping us to score audiences more intelligently, to tailor creative by segment, to suppress wasteful impressions and reduce spend and resources that might otherwise be just kind of lost. And so what we're going to be doing here, as an example, is to sequence messages by intent. And this works best when the logic is transparent and the underlying segment definitions are clearly tied to business goals and not vague assumptions. So think about this then, a little reflective question for you. Where in acquisition are you still sending broad messages that could be made much more relevant if you were to segment those messages down into segments or parts of your target audience who would really understand those individual messages rather than a generic vanilla flavor? Are there segments who just need a little bit of something special that really applies and talks to them individually? That's what we're talking about here. This is about thinking how deep and how far I need to go. Because when we talk about personalization, particularly at scale using AI, our minds often go to that one-to-one relationship. But that is often quite difficult to serve, particularly if this is new for your organization and you've always put out one flavor of everything and hope that it sticks with hopefully a good number of people. Personalization doesn't have to be hyper personalization down to the level of one to one. It can be one to a few. That can be a good starting point. And so you need to kind of be balancing this longer term desire to get to one relationships because you can with AI and actually temper that enthusiasm by maybe testing it out by doing some segmentation, particularly at that application of the awareness and acquisition stage. And what you can do again with some other examples of, say, web and app, you can do personalization in terms of the experience. So if you have website, most of us have, if not all of us, if you're developing apps to serve a particular customer, you can experiment with personalization in the experience through those things. So, for example, you can have personalized home pages that adapt and respond to the individual coming through or the segment or the channel that served them through into your site. You can look at product or content recommendations. Again, we've been used to this for a long time with the likes of Amazon. When you look at the Amazon products that are presented to you because of your search patterns and your previous buying patterns. It's a very simple thing there to look at. And also content recommendations based on what you're reading. AI can certainly serve and help you to do that. And so the strategic question, I guess, is whether each change improves the customer task, not only the conversion rate. So if they're looking at, working with you, if they're looking at coming through on a journey through your website, does this actually improve their experience as well as the conversion rate from your perspective? Because research shows that actually we want both. This has to be a win-win. So which page or app step would most benefit at the moment on your particular case from a more relevant experience in this way? That's a great question to think about. If you could only choose one place, for example, on your website where you were going to do some personalization, where would it be? For what reasons? Why? And would it benefit and give a perceived benefit to the customer as much as it would benefit you? Often in marketing, we're forced and pushed into, well, let's do stuff so that it benefits us to get the sales in this month or to increase our brand proposition or whatever it happens to be. And we lose sight of the fact there's got to be a win in this for the customer too. That is what we're talking about. And of course, with AI, we can get into those conversations with our chosen AI to improve both sides of the equation. We can also see this play out in email and life cycle through the sort of case of support. So AI can support send time optimization, subject line variations in emails, life cycle sequencing, basically people receiving emails personalized because of the point that they are in their life cycle with you. Retention or reactivation triggers to those who we want to keep or those who haven't really engaged for a while. All of these things can give a next best experience model, which is really, really useful here. This is a McKinsey model because it frames email as part of a wider decisioning system, not as a separate channel that we send email newsletters to just because we can or just because we've got an email database. This is part of some conscious decision making and thinking, okay, this is part of enhancing a broader customer journey of which email becomes just a part, just a channel, just a set of steps in the journey. So, another reflective question for you. Which life cycle moment currently would benefit most from more intelligent timing or content selection? Could it be email? It possibly could, couldn't it? If you think about it, are you using email personalized in this way, or are you just sending emails out through your favorite process, your favorite platform, rather? As most of us do that because it's convenient to us. But what's in it for the customer? Is this actually enhancing that balance of value to us and value to them? Often it isn't. So think about it in this new way, because these are some of the first steps to personalization at scale. And if you're trying to sell, most of us are in for-profit businesses. So commerce comes into play here in personalization at scale using AI. Recommendations and merchandising, for example, strong practical applications in this area include recommended products, bundles, replenishment prompts, upsell, cross-sell, even backsell can come into play here. This is not only a theoretical thing, this is something you can do, and it can improve customer satisfaction and loyalty when the relevance of what you're providing, because it's personalized, those recommendations are, wow, they're designed just for me. That can actually improve customer satisfaction and make it stronger. And the logic feels fair and useful from the customer's minds. And of course, it does. They perceive that you're thinking about them because, of course, you are. So, when in your buying journey, another reflection here, would recommendation logic feel most useful to the customer? Is there something in this where, you're pushing this particular product because you've got it available, it's ready to launch, so you're giving it all guns blazing, you're going out there and pushing it. But actually, for a particular customer, they might want this backup service as well. They might want that accessory. They might want longer term support with it. They might want education and training in terms of how to use it, etc., etc. It doesn't fit all, but it might fit a certain customer that you're looking to get more lifetime value from. That is what we're after here. That's what we're trying to create. And in service, I mentioned service just then. What is the next best action? AI personalization is increasingly being used in service. We see it on websites and chatbots, etc., all the time. And it can be used to retain and keep customers happy, keeping that customer satisfaction net promoter score high, and can support not only in media and content, but actually across the whole customer experience here. This can help the customer's decisions across the whole range of touch points they have with us, because their current need might be different to another customer's need over there, and another customer over there has a different need altogether. So, what customer service or retention moment for you currently feels a little bit generic when maybe it should feel a bit more responsive? Maybe this is where personalization can start to play a part. And this is where you can start to talk to your AI about how could we personalize the follow-up service? And this might in itself actually increase customer satisfaction. There might be some human in here. Just because it's AI personalization, AI enabled, does not mean we're cutting humans out of the equation. They might be part of the service offering that we're looking to talk about here. But at least it gives us a chance to personalize where it's important. And if we decide to take into effect any of these points in the customer journey, so, we've spotted maybe two or three areas where we think, okay, we're going to go in this, we're going to do some testing. And if it works, we piloted it, we're going to do it at scale. We're going to boost this kind of breadth, if you like, of actual application. We're going to do this, at these points in the journey. Then we need to be transparent. The ICO states that people affected by AI assisted decisions should be given explanations. And that explanation is expected, whichever type of AI assisted decision is made. In other words, the more transparent, if you are using AI to enable something, be it through a chatbot, be it through choices in a customer journey, wherever it is, the more transparent you are over the usage of AI. It's not a bad thing. AI is not a bad thing to be using. But once customers understand that they're seeing this for this point in the journey, for this reason, and yes, this is AI created, they can then settle into that and understand for themselves if it is relevant or not. Now, hopefully, because you've listened and you've done your research, it will be. But do not try and shroud this in secrecy. That is not playing the game of customer lifetime value. Openness, transparency, and honesty is everything. So make sure that that is included in what you're doing. And by doing that, what you're actually doing is you're starting to open up this opportunity to give customers control that they can actually use. Once customers are given access to their own data, to changing their profiles or their bios or whatever it is that you hold for them, updating that information gives them a sense of control. They feel like it's a relationship. This is not stuff that's kind of held behind the scenes and I don't really know. So I'm going to have to do a Freedom of Information Act request to find out what this company's holding on me. If you ever get one of those, there's work to be done because actually they should have been probably able to change that for themselves anyway, and you should have already told them. And often this is where companies come a little bit unstuck because it's like, well, no, that's our data. We call that first party data. Well, yeah, but the first party is your customer. So it's a relationship building tool, this. And useful control mechanisms here to enable that kind of honest transaction between the data that you hold from them, but also their use or ability to change or edit it, is that you give clear preferences. You let them choose the channels, the topic choices, the pause and frequency controls. All of these things enable them to be able to both opt in, but also meaningfully opt out of certain types of things that you might think is relevant, but they actually don't want. So, what kind of control would you or could you give your customers that would make them feel that personalization was a little bit more acceptable, that actually was a little bit more welcomed, and actually they might welcome it with both hands? Are there things that you do that you don't actually give the customer control in the relationship? Remember, I'm using this word relationship. It's absolutely key. This is something that is needing to be seen as a two-way thing. It's the customer's data after all. It isn't actually yours. So making sure they've got access to it and they can manipulate it and edit it when they want to on their terms, opting in, opting out. My bet, if I had to bet, would be that if you do this, they're going to opt into more than you think. And of course, you're still compliant by enabling them to do that. And what you're doing here is you're enabling them to ensure that what you're doing is fair and not biased, because bias comes into everything when we're talking about marketing communications. You'll know this that inherently everything that is human generated can have an innate bias to it. It is just how we're programmed. But our role here is to be fair and as unbiased as we can be reasonably expected to be. So, recent ethics research on AI in marketing highlights that we need to have responsibility, oversight, and that we need to be just kind of, comparing the risk of ethically questionable data, information, content, and decisions before we start to scale them. And this is why I'm saying that piloting and testing is important to do at a small scale before you roll this out everywhere. Because the more you roll it out, the more you exaggerate, the more you accelerate, the more you make big time the stuff that you've decided to do. So far better to get things a little biased and a little bit wrong in a small scale before you go to big scale. So I'm always an advocate, and I'm sure you'll understand that as well, of doing things small, testing it out, maybe ironing out some of those things, not necessarily looking for perfection. Does perfection ever exist? Big question mark there. I don't think it does. But actually, then just being fair, being true, being transparent, and building your guidelines, building your frameworks, building the way that you're going to be rolling this out, small scale before you go large. And in lots of ways, it is about building a simple operating model. That's what we're trying to do here. Personalization at scale feels like it is a big, unwieldy thing, but it doesn't have to be. I mean, a workable model could have just four key elements to it: marketing ownership of user cases and customer value, data and analytics support, a level of legal and privacy input, and product or channel owners. That is a simple operating model. We can start to personalize just by really paying attention to those four elements of this personalization operating model. And we need to agree, obviously, and review approval points and interactions between whoever is owning these four elements of the model. And it could be in a small organization, maybe one or a small number of people actually owning all four of these. But by having these steps and these approval points, by really thinking about how these things are going to impact our strategy and our campaigns, we get an opportunity to do this right. We get an opportunity to measure and monitor the model as we then roll it out, because it's that evidence, that data capture, almost building a journal about how we did it, that enables us to confidently say we are doing our best to remain within the guidelines, to remain ethical and transparent. We're not perfect, but what we're doing is we're doing it with due diligence and we're doing it with best intentions. And it's very hard if you're even the most skeptical or discerning customer to look at that and say, well, that's not good enough. Anything done with best intentions, as long as you're continuously learning and improving, has to be received by anybody who is reasonable, has to be received as a positive. And that's really what we're trying to do here. And what we're doing here, as I talk about journaling and measuring and monitoring what we're doing, is creating maybe a dashboard or a scorecard, because you will see the impact of this stuff if you begin to personalize at scale using AI. So a useful scorecard would probably show improvements in conversion quality, the retention or repeat purchases, the overall customer lifetime value, probably by individual customer, unsubscriber opt-out rates, complaint volume. These things will go up and down in a positive way, hopefully from rolling some of this stuff out through a strong and sound and good foundation-driven operating model. So decide what's important for you. You're going to see some signals, you're going to see some trends as you start to roll these kinds of things out. And this will, by monitoring it and by watching those trends, keep personalization tied to long-term value and help catch things early, particularly if you're monitoring those trends rather than just watching the latest campaign outputs. If you're watching for trends, then you get a very good chance to, again, go back and work with your AI to continuously improve what you see. So there's a lot of really, really sound, positive arguments for doing this stuff, even though at the outset it sounds like quite a hard thing to do. So where can we start? What can we begin with? Well, I would always suggest that we can actually use an experiment and learn loop. This is going to be the best way of starting to roll this personalization out. So a practical cycle could look something like this. Define the use case. So define the data that you need to serve that use case. Check lawful basis and governance, those things, and a lot of those guides are available that I was talking about earlier. Test a controlled experience. Keep it small. You don't have to think of the whole customer journey. Maybe take one element of the customer journey through maybe a small number of channels and just see where you can personalize, see where you can use AI to do that in a controlled way, and test the controlled experience. Be very open to whatever you see, both the upside and the downside. So measure uplift and monitor downside, and then refine, document, and scale. This is much safer, much more effective than trying to personalize everything at once, or trying to think that, oh, yes, we can go to the whole of our customer base and try and do this. Take things steady and small. Start to build good habits, build that operating model, build those cycles. So a reflective question for you is, what's the smallest personalization experiment you could run safely in the next, let's say, 30 days? Is there something you could do just to kind of dip your toe in the water, just to test out some of these principles and some of these flows? Because if you can start to make even the smallest incremental difference to what you have now, that is going to produce a big, big upside when you scale it using AI. So some final reflections here. The strongest AI personalization programs do four things well. They solve a real customer need. They use disciplined data foundations. They explain themselves openly and honestly, very, very clearly. And they protect trust and the value, both directions of the relationship, whilst improving value. And that is how personalization becomes a strategic capability rather than just, as many businesses do, just a collection of automated tactics.